That night, Grace appeared at my doorstep, elegant, successful, and yet her eyes carried the same pain I had once seen when she was just a little girl sitting in her father's car. She looked at me and whispered, "Mrs. Eleanor, how do you live with dignity when the world keeps reminding you of where you came from?" And in that single question, I saw her whole life, the struggle, the pride, the silence, and the longing to be free. That night changed both of us forever. Hi, everyone. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I'm 60 years old. I've spent most of my life working as an executive in a world that worships money, appearances, and status. But with time, I learned something very different, that true wealth has nothing to do with your bank account and everything to do with your heart. I've seen people lose themselves chasing luxury, and I've seen people with nothing live like kings because they had peace. One of the most beautiful lessons of my life came from someone who had far less than I did, the daughter of my driver. Her name was Grace, and tonight I want to tell you her story. And maybe, through her journey, you'll see a reflection of your own. I first met Grace when she was about 8 years old. Her father, Daniel, had been driving for me for nearly 10 years. He was an early riser, always arrived 15 minutes before time, always in a clean shirt, always with a smile. He wasn't just a driver, he was one of those rare souls who believed that work done with honesty was a prayer. Every morning he'd say, "Good morning, ma'am." Another blessed day, and I'd smile back, sometimes wondering how a man who earned so little could carry so much peace in his voice. One summer afternoon, after a long meeting, I came down to the parking lot. There she was, a small girl sitting quietly in the back seat, her legs swinging, holding a book so old the pages were yellow. Her eyes were deep, observant, almost too mature for her age. I asked Daniel, "Who's this lovely young lady?" He smiled proudly. "My daughter, Grace. She waits with me after school while I work." Then, almost apologetically, he added, "She had to leave school for a while. I couldn't pay the fees this month." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake off her face. The next morning, I called Daniel into my office. "Daniel," I said, "from now on, Grace will come to my home every afternoon. I'll help her study. And don't argue. This isn't charity. It's an investment in someone bright." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," I said, "by raising a daughter who loves to learn." That afternoon, Grace arrived, shy, polite, her hands clasped together. She didn't look up much. Her eyes stayed on the floor. "Sit here," I told her, pointing to the sofa. She hesitated. "Ma'am, I'll sit on the floor." "Why?" I asked gently. "Because that's where I belong," she whispered. I smiled. "Not in my house, Grace. Here we sit together." That was her first lesson. Equality doesn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes it's felt in how someone treats you. The first few weeks were quiet. Grace studied diligently, but rarely smiled. So one day I asked, "What's your favorite dream?" She looked surprised. "Dream?" "Yes, something you want more than anything." She paused for a long moment. "Maybe to be someone people respect, not because they have to, but because they want to." That line stayed with me for years. Months passed. Grace learned fast: English, math, history. But more than subjects, we talked about life. She'd ask questions no textbook could answer. "Ma'am, do rich people ever feel lonely?" "Of course," I said. "Sometimes the loneliest people are the ones surrounded by others." She frowned. Then why do they still want more? Because, I told her, they think more will fill the emptiness inside. But peace doesn't live in mansions, it lives in hearts. Years went by, and Grace became a confident teenager. Daniel was proud. He often told me, "She'll go farther than any of us." But life has its own rhythm. One rainy evening, I received a call. Daniel had been in an accident. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. Grace sat there, her face pale, her hands trembling. When she saw me, she broke down completely. "He was all I had," she whispered. I held her close, feeling the weight of her grief. Then I said, "You still have his values, Grace. That's more powerful than anything money could ever leave you." For a while, she stayed with me. Then one morning, she told me she wanted to move to the city and study. She had found a part-time job and a scholarship. I was hesitant. She was still so young, but her determination reminded me of her father, so I gave her my blessing. The next 5 years passed quietly. Every now and then I'd get a postcard. "Mrs. Eleanor, I got top marks this semester." "Mrs. Eleanor, I got a new job." And finally, "Mrs. Eleanor, I've been accepted into graduate school." I smiled each time. She was doing exactly what her father had hoped, building a life on honesty and effort. Then, suddenly, the letters stopped. Months turned into years. I sometimes wondered what had become of her. Until one night, nearly 15 years later, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, there she was, Grace. But not the girl I remembered. Now she was a woman, graceful, confident, dressed sharply, yet her eyes carried the same warmth, the same soul. "Grace?" I gasped. She smiled faintly. "It's been a while, Mrs. Eleanor." We sat in my living room, the same old couch, the same teacups. She looked around and said, "You haven't changed anything." I smiled. Why would I? Peace doesn't need renovation. She laughed softly, but her laughter faded quickly. "I came to ask you something," she said. "What is it?" "How do you live with dignity, without showing it off, without needing to prove anything to anyone?" Her voice broke slightly as she spoke. I leaned back and said, "You live with dignity when your peace means more than people's opinions, when you stop chasing validation and start listening to your own truth." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. She told me about her life, the city, the success, the loneliness. She had become a respected consultant, owned a car, a fancy apartment, but somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. "I bought everything I once dreamed of," she said, "yet every night I come home and feel empty." I keep thinking of my father and the peace he had even when he had nothing. I listened quietly. Then I said, "Grace, peace is not built from success. It's built from acceptance. You've been fighting to prove you belong, but you've always belonged, not to their world, but to your own." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I think I forgot who I was," she whispered. "Then find her again," I said gently. "Start small. Stop pretending. Speak kindly. Choose simplicity. The rest will follow." She nodded, taking a deep breath. We spoke for hours about love, loss, guilt, and forgiveness. She told me about her mother, who still worked as a cleaner. "I asked her to retire," she said. She refused. She said, "Grace, I have my little house, my little garden, and my peace." I smiled. "Then your mother is richer than most millionaires I know." She laughed softly through her tears. "Maybe that's what I came here to understand, that real wealth is learning to live without the need to impress anyone."
Before she left, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me when no one else did." I said, "You don't need to thank me, Grace. Just promise me something. When you have children, teach them the value of people, not the price. Teach them kindness and humility, things that cost nothing but mean everything." She smiled. "I promise." With all my heart. And when she walked out, she looked lighter, freer, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally fallen away. That night, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across my floor. The world outside kept rushing, chasing things that would never last. But I sat quietly, content, because I had something no one could buy: peace. And I realized once again that real wealth isn't about what you own. It's about how much you enjoy what you have. It's about waking up without guilt, sleeping without fear, and loving without conditions. Grace had found her peace that night, and I had found mine. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Greater than Mrs. Eleanor, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. Thank you for teaching me what real dignity feels like." I replied simply, "Greater than, I'm proud of you, Grace. Always." Then I set the phone down, looked out the window, and smiled as the sunrise painted the sky in gold. And in that quiet moment, I whispered to myself, "This is enough. This is everything